I never imagined that answering a phone call on a rainy Tuesday would quietly change the next 2 years of my life. My name is Sasha, and at the time I had been looking for stable work for almost 4 months. Bills kept piling up, my savings were disappearing faster than I wanted to admit, and every interview ended with the same polite email thanking me for my time. When Brightstone Logistics offered me a position as an operations coordinator, I accepted without hesitation. The company wasn't glamorous. We coordinated deliveries for local manufacturers and retail chains, making sure trucks left warehouses on time and customers received their orders without delays. Most people would probably call it boring office work. For me, it felt like a second chance. On my first morning, the office looked exactly how I expected. Gray cubicles, fluorescent lights that buzzed quietly above our heads, coffee that tasted like burned cardboard, and employees who barely looked away from their monitors long enough to notice someone new. A woman with shoulder-length blonde hair approached my desk. "You must be Sasha." I stood up. "Yeah." She smiled politely. "I'm Anna. I'll help you survive your first week." That sentence made me laugh. "I'm serious," she said. "Everyone else is too busy pretending they're busy." She wasn't wrong. Anna explained every system patiently, showed me where files were stored, introduced me to the warehouse supervisors, and even warned me which printer randomly jammed every afternoon. "If you can avoid printer 3, she whispered, "your blood pressure will thank you." By lunchtime, I already felt more comfortable than I had expected. Then I met Chris. He walked into the operations room carrying 2 tablets and talking loudly into a headset. "No excuses," he said before ending the call. He looked around until his eyes landed on me. "So you're the new coordinator?" "Yes. I'm Chris, operations manager." His handshake lasted exactly 1 second. "If mistakes happen, I expect honesty." "I understand." "Good." Then he walked away without another word. Anna leaned toward me after he disappeared. "Don't take it personally." I wasn't. He talks to everyone like that. During the following weeks, I settled into the routine surprisingly quickly. Every morning started at 7:30. Drivers checked in. Warehouses confirmed inventory. Schedules changed every hour. Someone always called complaining about delayed shipments. It was stressful, but I actually enjoyed solving problems. Instead of panicking whenever something went wrong, I focused on finding solutions. Apparently, customers appreciated that. Several clients started asking for me directly whenever they called. One afternoon, Anna smiled while reading an email. "You've got another compliment." "What now?" Sasha stayed on the phone until everything was resolved. She laughed. "You know what the funny part is?" "What?" "Most people would have transferred that customer to someone else. I was already talking to him." "Exactly. Little by little, I became someone people relied on. Drivers trusted my schedules. Warehouse supervisors answered my calls immediately. Even customer service started checking with me before promising delivery times. Everything seemed to be going well. At least that's what I thought. About 2 months after I started, Chris called me into his office. He closed the door behind me. "I've been reviewing this week's reports." "Okay. You've been changing delivery priorities." "Only after getting warehouse approval. I don't like unauthorized decisions." "They weren't unauthorized." I showed him the email chain on my tablet. Warehouse approval. Client confirmation. Updated schedule. Everything documented. Chris looked at the screen for barely 2 seconds. "Next time, ask me first." I tried. "When?" "Tuesday morning." "You weren't available." He crossed his arms. "Then you wait." I stared at him for a second. If I had waited, 3 trucks would have sat idle for 6 hours. I said wait. The conversation ended there. As I walked back to my desk, Anna quietly asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah." But something felt different. Over the next few weeks, Chris started questioning almost every decision I made. If a shipment arrived early, did you really need to rearrange the route? If a customer thanked me, don't make promises you can't keep. If another department complimented my work, you should focus less on looking helpful. It didn't make sense. I wasn't breaking rules. In fact, our monthly performance report showed fewer delayed deliveries than before I joined. The numbers spoke for themselves. Still, Chris acted as if every improvement was somehow suspicious. One Friday afternoon, the regional director visited our office. His name was Michael, and unlike Chris, he actually talked to employees. He stopped beside my desk. "You're Sasha?" "Yes. I've heard good things." I smiled. "Thank you. The North Point account said you've reduced response times by almost 40%. I've just been trying to organize things better." "Keep doing that." It lasted less than 30 seconds. But I noticed something afterward. Chris had been standing near the conference room, watching. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. That evening, Anna packed her bag and sighed. "I hope I'm wrong." "About what?" She hesitated. "Chris doesn't like it when upper management notices someone else." I laughed. "You're overthinking it." "I wish I were." Monday morning proved she wasn't. At exactly 8:15, an email appeared in everyone's inbox. New procedure for operational changes. From now on, every scheduling adjustment, no matter how small, required Chris's personal approval. The warehouse supervisors hated it immediately. Drivers started waiting longer. Customers experienced delays that hadn't existed before. By Wednesday afternoon, our response times had doubled. Everyone knew why. Nobody said it out loud. Late that evening, while finishing paperwork, Anna walked over carrying 2 coffees. She placed one beside my keyboard. "I've been here 6 years," she said quietly. "I know this pattern." "What pattern?" She looked around to make sure nobody else could hear. "When someone starts making the department look better than Chris does." She paused. "He starts making that person look worse." I wanted to believe she was mistaken. I really did. But as I opened my inbox the next morning and saw another message questioning work I had already documented twice, for the first time since joining Brightstone Logistics, I started wondering whether my biggest challenge at this company wouldn't be the job itself. It would be my own manager. The following month became a lesson in how a workplace can change without anyone officially admitting that anything has changed. Nothing dramatic happened overnight. There were no shouting matches, no public arguments, no written warnings. Instead, everything became just a little harder. Every route adjustment required Chris's approval, but he rarely answered immediately. Sometimes he responded after 15 minutes, sometimes after 2 hours, sometimes not at all. Meanwhile, trucks sat in loading bays waiting for instructions that everyone already knew. Drivers became frustrated. Warehouse supervisors started calling my extension every morning. "Sasha, can we move truck 18 to dock 4? I already requested approval." And "I'm still waiting." The answer was always the same. "So are we." By the middle of the week, customers had started noticing the delays. One afternoon, a longtime client called sounding irritated. "This never used to happen." "I understand. I've worked with your company for 3 years. I'm doing everything I can." He sighed. "I know it's not you." That sentence stayed with me long after the call ended. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who noticed what was happening. Even people in accounting began asking why deliveries suddenly required so many approvals. The strange part was that Chris blamed every delay on the coordinators. During the Monday operations meeting, he projected a report onto the conference room screen. "Our response times have increased by 23%. Nobody said anything. Chris looked around the table. "Any ideas why?" Everyone avoided eye contact. Finally, he looked directly at me. "Sasha." I answered honestly. "The additional approval process has slowed scheduling." Chris folded his arms. "No." Silence. "The real problem," he continued, "is that people have become too comfortable making independent decisions." I glanced at Anna. She stared at her notebook without saying a word. The meeting ended 5 minutes later. As everyone walked back toward the operations floor, one of the warehouse supervisors caught up with me. "I've been here 12 years, he whispered. "I've never seen paperwork delay trucks more than mechanical problems." Neither had I. The pressure continued building. Chris started forwarding customer complaints directly to me, even when I wasn't responsible. If a shipment left another warehouse late, my inbox received the complaint. If a driver ignored instructions, Chris copied me into the email. If another department made a mistake. Somehow my name appeared in the discussion. First I assumed it was accidental. After the 10th time I knew it wasn't. Anna noticed too. You save every email? Every single one. Good. You think I'll need them? She looked at me seriously. I think everyone should keep records. That answer told me everything. Despite everything, our team kept working together. Drivers still called me when they needed help. Warehouse managers continued asking for my opinion before changing schedules. Even employees from other departments stopped by my desk. One afternoon, a dispatcher named Kevin leaned against my cubicle. I don't get it. What? You solve problems faster than anyone. I just answer my phone. Exactly. He laughed. Apparently that's considered suspicious now. We both smiled. Small conversations like that reminded me I wasn't imagining things. Other people saw it too. Near the end of the quarter, Brightstone announced that headquarters would perform an internal performance review. Managers suddenly became nervous. Departments cleaned shared folders. Reports were updated. Policies that nobody had mentioned for months suddenly became important again. Chris held another meeting. The auditors will interview several employees. He paused. If anyone is asked questions, answer only what you're asked. Nobody reacted. Then he added something strange. And don't speculate about management decisions. That sentence immediately caught my attention. Why would anyone speculate? Unless someone was worried they already were. 2 days later, the auditors arrived. Unlike executives, they spent time watching people work. They walked through the warehouse, sat beside dispatchers, listened to customer service calls, asked questions that actually made sense. One of them introduced herself during lunch. I'm Laura. Sasha. I've heard your name a few times today. Hopefully for good reasons. She smiled. So far. She asked me to explain how scheduling normally worked. I showed her the software, the delivery board, the approval chain. She watched quietly. Then she frowned. Why does every minor adjustment require a manager? It didn't before. When did that change? About a month ago. She wrote something in her notebook. Has it improved efficiency? I hesitated. I wanted to stay professional. So I answered honestly. It increased response times. By how much? Roughly 20%. She looked surprised. And nobody questioned that? I assume someone did. Laura nodded slowly before thanking me. The conversation lasted maybe 10 minutes. But I noticed Chris watching us through the conference room window. Again. That Friday afternoon, Chris stopped by my desk. Busy. Always. I need you in my office. His tone was calm. Too calm. After I sat down, he closed the door. I heard you spoke with the auditors. They asked about scheduling. You should have directed them to me. They interviewed several employees. They're evaluating management. They asked how the process works. He leaned back in his chair. You've been receiving a lot of attention lately. I'm just answering questions. I'd be careful. I looked at him. Careful about what? He smiled. The company rewards loyalty. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he dismissed me. When I returned to my desk, Anna didn't ask what happened. She already knew from my expression. That bad? Worse. She slowly opened one of her desk drawers. Inside was a thick folder. Emails, printed reports, meeting notes, approval records, dates highlighted with yellow tabs. I looked at her. You've been keeping all this? For 3 years. Why? She closed the folder. Because one day someone will ask what really happened. I felt a chill. You think today is that day? No. She looked toward Chris's office. I think it's getting closer. Neither of us realized that before the month was over. Someone else inside Brightstone had already started asking exactly those questions. The questions started quietly. Not from senior management. Not from Chris. From people who worked on the warehouse floor every day. One Monday morning, I arrived 20 minutes early and found 2 supervisors standing outside the operations office drinking coffee. One of them, David, nodded toward me. Sasha. Morning. We've been comparing delivery reports. Okay. He hesitated before speaking again. The delays only happen when approvals are waiting. I know. We checked. That surprised me. You checked. For 3 weeks. His coworker pulled a folded notebook from his jacket. We wrote down every truck that waited for approval. He opened the pages. Departure times. Approval requests. Actual release times. Customer complaints. Everything was listed. I wasn't expecting this. David shrugged. When the warehouse loses overtime because trucks sit still, people notice. For the first time, I realized the frustration wasn't limited to our office. The entire operation was slowing down. Around noon, Anna walked over carrying several folders. You should see this. What is it? She placed them on my desk. Monthly performance reports. The first report was from 6 months before I joined the company. The second covered the period after I started. The third showed the months after Chris introduced mandatory approvals. The pattern couldn't have been clearer. Before the approvals, average customer response time, 11 minutes. After the approvals, 21 minutes. Delayed departures had nearly doubled. Customer complaints had increased by almost 30%. None of the numbers supported Chris's decisions. Anna quietly said, "Funny how these reports never come up during meetings." I flipped through another page. They're official reports. I know. So why doesn't anyone mention them? She gave a tired smile. Because numbers only matter when they support the person presenting them. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. Laura, one of the auditors, returned. This time she wasn't alone. Another auditor joined her, introducing himself as Daniel. Instead of meeting managers first, they walked directly into the operations department. Chris looked confused. I thought the review was finished. Daniel smiled politely. We're following up. For what? A few operational questions. They spent almost 2 hours speaking with dispatchers, warehouse supervisors, customer service representatives, and drivers. Nobody had prepared for this visit. People answered honestly. Drivers explained how often they waited for approvals. Warehouse staff described loaded trucks sitting at the docks. Customer service agents showed emails from frustrated clients. No one exaggerated. They simply described what happened every day. Near the end of the afternoon, Laura approached my desk again. Do you have a minute? Of course. She sat beside me instead of taking me to a conference room. I'd like to understand something. I'm listening. When approvals are delayed. She pointed toward the scheduling software. Can the coordinator release a truck anyway? No. What happens if you do? We can receive a formal disciplinary notice. So even if the shipment is urgent, I still have to wait. She looked genuinely puzzled. Has anyone questioned that policy? I don't know. She thanked me and left. Chris watched the conversation from across the office without saying a word. Later that evening, just as I was preparing to leave, my inbox chimed. Subject: Meeting mandatory attendance. Tuesday, 9 a.m. Conference room B. Operations department only. No explanation. Just a calendar invitation sent by Chris. Anna looked over from her desk. You got it too? Yeah. She sighed. I don't like surprise meetings. Neither did I. The next morning, everyone arrived early. Nobody talked much. The conference room felt unusually tense. Chris entered carrying a stack of printed documents. He placed them on the table one by one. Performance statistics. Customer complaints. Delivery delays. He cleared his throat. Our department has experienced declining performance. Nobody interrupted. As manager, I expect accountability. Then he began assigning responsibility. Dispatch was blamed for communication. Warehouses were blamed for loading delays. Customer service was blamed for unrealistic expectations. Finally, he reached my name. Sasha. I looked up. Several clients have reported slower service. I frowned. Compared to when? The previous quarter. I opened one of the reports lying in front of me. The previous quarter had different approval procedures. Chris ignored the comment. The issue is consistency. I looked around the room. Everyone was reading the same reports. Then something happened that nobody expected. David, the warehouse supervisor, raised his hand. I have a question. Chris looked annoyed. What? David slid his own notebook across the table. We've recorded every delayed departure for the past 3 weeks. Silence. The delays started after mandatory approvals. Chris didn't touch the notebook. Daniel and Laura, the auditors, were sitting quietly at the back of the room observing everything. David continued. We aren't guessing. He opened the notebook. We recorded timestamps. Another supervisor spoke. So did we. A dispatcher added. I exported system logs yesterday. Then someone from customer service placed printed emails onto the table. Our complaints matched the same timeline. For the first time since I joined Brightstone, people weren't speaking individually. They were speaking together. Chris's confident expression began to fade. He looked toward the auditors. This discussion isn't necessary. Laura finally spoke. I think it is. She calmly opened her laptop. We've been comparing employee statements with operational records. She projected a graph onto the screen. Response times, approval delays, customer complaints, truck idle hours. Every trend matched perfectly. Nobody had manipulated anything. The data told the story by itself. The room became completely silent. Chris tried one last argument. Statistics don't always show the full picture. Daniel answered before anyone else could. That's true. He closed the report. Which is why we interviewed 27 employees. Nobody moved. 24 described the same approval bottleneck. Chris looked around the room. No one defended him. Not because people disliked him. Because nobody could honestly disagree with the evidence anymore. The meeting ended without another word. Employees quietly returned to their desks. The auditors stayed behind with Chris. As I walked back to my workstation, Anna whispered, I've waited years to see someone actually listen. I nodded. But somehow, I had a feeling this wasn't the end. Because later that afternoon, an email from Human Resources appeared in my inbox. It contained only one sentence. Sasha, we'd appreciate it if you could meet with us tomorrow morning regarding the operational review. I barely slept that night. The email from Human Resources wasn't threatening, but it wasn't reassuring either. After everything that had happened during the audit, I had no idea what to expect. By the time I arrived the next morning, the office felt strangely quiet. People greeted each other as usual, but conversations stopped whenever someone walked by. Everyone knew something important was happening. At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked into the HR conference room. Inside were 3 people. Melissa from Human Resources, Laura, one of the auditors, and Daniel. Melissa smiled. Good morning, Sasha. Morning. Please have a seat. She waited until the door closed before speaking. First, thank you for cooperating during the review. Of course. Laura slid a folder across the table. We've completed our operational assessment. I looked at the thick report but didn't open it. Daniel continued. The purpose of today's meeting isn't disciplinary. That was the first time I relaxed since entering the room. It's about understanding what happened inside the operations department. For nearly an hour they asked detailed questions. Nothing dramatic. Just facts. When did the approval process change? How were decisions made before? Who communicated policy updates? Did anyone pressure employees not to question procedures? Whenever I wasn't certain, I said so. Whenever I had documentation, I showed it. Emails, scheduling logs, approval requests. Everything matched the company's own records. Nobody had to exaggerate anything. The facts were already enough. Before the meeting ended, Melissa closed her notebook. I appreciate your professionalism. Thank you. We know these situations aren't easy. As I stood to leave, Daniel added one last sentence. You did exactly what an employee should do. What's that? You focused on doing your job. The rest of the day felt unusually calm. Nobody from management interrupted our work. Approvals still existed, but they were coming back within minutes instead of hours. By lunchtime, drivers had already noticed. One of them laughed over the radio. Feels like we're actually working again. Another replied, let's hope it stays that way. The following Monday, everyone in operations received an invitation to a department meeting. This time the sender wasn't Chris. It was the regional director. Michael stood at the front of the conference room. He looked around before speaking. "I'll keep this brief." He placed a folder on the table. "The operational review has been completed." No one moved. "We found that several management decisions created unnecessary delays and reduced efficiency." He didn't mention anyone by name. He didn't need to. "The approval process introduced earlier this year will be removed effective immediately." A quiet murmur spread through the room. Warehouse supervisors exchanged relieved looks. Dispatchers smiled for the first time in weeks. Michael continued. "We're also making leadership changes within the department." Chris wasn't in the room. No explanation followed. Again, none was necessary. The company appreciates everyone who continued working professionally despite the challenges. He paused. Operation succeeds because of teamwork, not because one person controls every decision. Those words earned a few quiet nods around the room. The difference was noticeable almost immediately. Without unnecessary approvals, trucks left on time again. Customer complaints began dropping week after week. Warehouse managers stopped waiting for signatures that served no practical purpose. Drivers spent more time delivering orders than sitting in parking lots. Even the atmosphere inside the office changed. People laughed again. They asked each other for help instead of worrying whether someone would criticize them for taking initiative. About a month later, the monthly performance report arrived. Average response time had fallen back below 12 minutes. Customer satisfaction reached its highest level in nearly 2 years. The improvements weren't because anyone worked longer hours. We were simply allowed to do our jobs again. One Friday afternoon, Anna walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee, just like she had on my first week. She placed one beside my keyboard. "You remember what I told you your first day?" I smiled. "I'll help you survive your first week." She laughed. I underestimated how long that would take. So did I. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she quietly admitted, "I almost quit last year." I looked at her in surprise. "Really?" "I had interviews lined up." "What changed?" She looked around the office. "Hope." Several weeks later, Michael stopped by my desk. "You have a minute?" "Sure." We walked into one of the small meeting rooms. "I wanted to thank you." "I didn't do anything special." "You did." He smiled. "You stayed professional when it would have been easier to become angry." "I just wanted the work to make sense. And that's exactly why we're talking." He slid a document across the table. "We'd like you to become Senior Operations Coordinator." I stared at the paper. I wasn't expecting this. "It's not a reward for the audit." He leaned forward. "It's because your coworkers trust you." That meant more than the promotion itself. I accepted. The new role didn't make my days easier. There were still delayed trucks, unexpected weather, customers who changed orders at the last minute. Computers still crashed. Printers still jammed. Printer 3 somehow was still the worst one in the building. Some things never changed. But one thing was different. Whenever someone had an idea to improve a process, they weren't afraid to speak. Instead of asking, "Who approved this?" people started asking, "Will this help?" That small change transformed the entire department. Almost a year after I joined Brightstone Logistics, a new employee arrived. He looked exactly as nervous as I had on my first day. Before anyone else reached him, I walked over. "You must be the new coordinator." He nodded. "I'm a little overwhelmed." "I know the feeling." I showed him where everything was. The scheduling system, the warehouse contacts, the coffee machine that only worked if you pressed the button twice. Finally, I pointed toward the corner where Anna was organizing shipment reports. "If you ever need help," I said, "just ask." He smiled. "Thanks." As I returned to my desk, Anna looked at me and laughed. "You just stole my line." "What line?" She grinned. "I'll help you survive your first week." I laughed too. Maybe that was the biggest lesson I learned from everything that happened. A workplace isn't remembered because of its building, its software, or its quarterly reports. People remember how they were treated. Good leadership isn't about controlling every decision. It's about creating an environment where people can do their best work, trust one another, and leave each day knowing their effort mattered. And sometimes changing a workplace doesn't begin with a speech. Sometimes it begins with one employee who quietly keeps doing the right thing until everyone else finally has the courage to do the same.